Today's gospel passage is one of those scriptures that probably a lot more Christians need to read. And I say that because it's really common to hear Christians accusing other Christians of being Pharisees, but it's clear they haven't really read and understood Scripture and understood what the real problem with the Pharisees was. You see, the problem with the Pharisees is not that they were moral people who were committed to living out and calling other people to live out God's moral law. Jesus very clearly spells this out in today's gospel. The problem with the Pharisees was that they did not practice what they preach. So Jesus says you must do what they tell you to do, but don't act like they do, because they're hypocrites. They aren't living out what they are calling other people to live out. They don't practice what they preach. So if you're someone who talks a lot about morality, who might even defend God's moral law, but you're not really living it out, then yeah, it would be right and fair to suggest that you are being just like a Pharisee. The other hallmark of what it means to be a Pharisee that Jesus points out in today's gospel is that the Pharisees were full of pride. They loved taking the place of honour, being seen with the long phylacteries and everything else that Christ talks about in today's gospel. So if you're someone who talks a good game and likes to do Christianity because of the appearance and the prestige or whatever it is that you think it might give you, then it would also be right to suggest that you are being like a Pharisee. But a person who believes firmly in the moral law that God has given to us, and a person who calls others to that moral law, and a person who even defends that moral law and might point out at times where others are going wrong in their understanding or living out of that moral law, that person is not actually being a Pharisee. That's not what makes you a Pharisee. One of the big things that Jesus highlights in today's gospel, again, is this idea of compassion, of wanting to help people. What is it that motivates you to talk about God's moral law when you are talking about moral issues with people? Is it a genuine desire to see them flourish and experience a more full experience of what it is to be human? Is it a genuine desire to see people come closer to God? Or is it just about pontificating and talking down to people with no real desire to actually help them? Because if you're doing that, then that is also one of the hallmarks, and very problematic hallmarks, of what it is to be a Pharisee. Today's Saint quote of the day comes from Saint Jerome, and he said this: "Ignorance of Scripture is ignorance of Christ." And to me, that quote really sums up the problem I was highlighting in today's gospel reflection. A lot of people clearly haven't read and understood Christ's actual words and criticisms of the Pharisees. Otherwise, they wouldn't misuse that term Pharisee like we hear a lot of people doing today. You see, if you want to answer that age-old question, what would Jesus do? You've actually got to know who Jesus is. You've got to read and understand his life and his teachings. And the place that you need to do that is in the Gospels. If we are ignorant of the Gospels, if we are ignorant of the Scriptures, then we cannot really claim to truly know who Christ is, and we can't claim to know his teachings and what it is that he expects of us in this life. What's the cure for this problem? Well, it's really obvious. We need to spend time daily reflecting on the Scriptures and immersing ourselves in the words of Christ so that we can actually come to know and love him more deeply.